Hello. Suddenly, I've got lights, I've got a microphone, I've got a tripod, I've got all the stuff. There's also a big pile of cardboard boxes filled with pictures there. Don't look at them, look at the books rather than that. So I've got all the gubbins. I hope this works. Right, this is Monday. I'll post it on Tuesday for BookTube. Um, Talking through another shelf full of these books, which, as I've said, are double stacked, which is ridiculous. And I've just had another bunch fall on me. Hold on. That's quite good, actually, the randomness of books falling on you, because they've picked out some favourites. Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking is a beautiful, beautiful memoir about losing her husband and her daughter inside a year. She's an essayist, a wonderful American essayist, lived in New York, very New York book. And it's about something I'd never read anybody tackling before. And it's a very real situation when somebody loses somebody important, and then, rational being though they might be, they refuse to believe it. And she talks about when everybody clears the place after the funeral, she's expecting her husband to walk back into the room. And it's so true. It's magical thinking. It's how we irrationally behave. And it's a memoir of this whole life together as writers through the kind of 60s, 70s, 80s. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. What else has fallen off my shelf, literally? The Mersey Sound collection, which I think I mentioned the other day when I was talking about Adrian Henry and read out um, a not very good poem about cats that made socks leave the room. This is a nice reprint of their 60s collection: Adrian Henry, Roger McGough, and Brian Patton. This is really great stuff. As I remember, um, the kind of book you carry around with you. Sorry, I should be reading aloud. If I'm reading, I should dip into books and just you can watch me read them. And this fell on me as well just now, which was a lovely American romance novel, very light, very sweet. The Irresistible Blueberry Bake Shop and Cafe. Mary Simses, I think you pronounce it. Um, Very warm, Long Islandy, a bit kind of Hallmark movie, the kind of fancier end of that kind of genre. I love Hallmark movies. Don't get me wrong. Christmas Around the Corner. That's the one to watch out for Hallmark films. Anyway, this is the that whole genre which has become massive in this country, especially, of the little bookshop, cake shop, newspaper shop, curry house on the corner of the blah 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 um, of dreams. That genre, which I love. You know what I mean. Okay, what else? I talked before about James Baldwin, and then a bunch of his paperbacks dropped out on me. These are lovely corgi vintage books that I've read into absolute submission. Going to Meet the Man, his collection of stories, which contains Sonny's Blues, which is one of the great short stories. Another Country, which is a nice big. God, the print is tiny. I read this in 2003, before and during my first visit to Paris, wandering around with James Baldwin. I love this book. They're just, they're sophisticated. That's what his books are. They're not in a kind of fancy way, in a kind of fakey literary fiction way, with that kind of indigestible kind of prose. His prose is dynamic and muscular, but they're grown up in the sense that they're dealing with sophisticated, complicated emotions and situations. Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone, which I think I actually bought in Paris from one of these really lovely English language bookshops, of which there are fewer and fewer. San Francisco bookshop in Saint Germain, where everything's €5, which is an outrage. They're expensive, but it's one of my favorites. So that's James Baldwin, my small collection of his books. Talking of Paris, John Baxter's The Most Beautiful Walk in the World. a memoir by a writer who wrote a lovely book about book collecting called Pound of Paper. It's here somewhere behind the camera. And he talks about the book dealer's business, about book sales at dawn and people flocking to back streets in Paris or in London to scour estate sales for bargains. This book is about being a pedestrian in Paris. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. A really good holiday book, actually, especially if you're in Paris. But it's a great way of imagining yourself there. And I read this August 2020 when we couldn't go anywhere, when we would have expected to be on holiday, when you could go absolutely nowhere. And of course, I'm thinking about it at the moment because it's 4 years, almost to the day that we went into lockdown. We kind of locked ourselves in a couple of weeks before the government told us to, thinking it prudent. Anyway, that summer we imagined ourselves in all kinds of places using books. And the idea of being a pedestrian in Paris was very, very alluring. So I'll always be grateful to John Baxter for that. And honestly, his Pound of Paper, which I'm still looking for on that full bookcase behind you, is a smashing book as well. John Waters' essays, role models. His book Crackpot is even better. This is a later collection in which he does essays about, and the one I remember most is Johnny Mathis, trying to out Johnny Mathis and just falling for his charm in person. And people like Little Richard and stuff. He writes, as you know, about kitsch and about camp and about trash, all the things we love. And he writes with such cleverness and zest. Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. This is really a favourites shelf, kind of eclectic favourites shelf, full of kind of zigzagging genres. This is one of the great haunted house books, one of the great psychological horror books. I also read last year We've Always Lived in the Castle, which I'd managed to not read for years and years, and that was just as good, if not better. So I'd always recommend Shirley Jackson. This is quite a nice edition, these Penguin ones. This is when Penguin books, and I was ranting about this the other day, were slightly nicer than the ones they're publishing just now. I think they've gone a bit cheap. I hate to say that, but their productions now seem a bit mingy compared. Anyway, here's someone that's gone out of fashion. Richard Brautigan. This is Watermelon Sugar. He's a kind of hippie, a kind of post-beat American hippie who writes short gnomic chapters, very surreal novels. They're kind of like Gertrude Stein's wandering, repetitive sentences if she'd survived into the 70s and was wandering around off her tiny tits. I loved his books. I've read them all, I think, and I haven't got a clue what he's talking about most of the time. It's just a seductive trance that you're pulled into with Brautigan. I wish somebody would bring him back somehow. Another crazy book, My Elvis Blackout by Simon Crump, which is one of the strangest, surreal. It kind of is of a piece with Brautigan in some ways. It's the same tradition of whacked out literary, not fantasy exactly. It's kind of surreal, kind of experimental. Um, I really like this. Funny to see published by Bloomsbury, who I think of as a very, very kind of conventional publishing house nowadays. Oh, Crocodilia, Philip Ridley. He's a lovely writer. This is Brilliance Books, which was kind of gay fiction back in the day. 88, this was. And this is one of his adult novels. He wrote wonderful novels for kids. And when my sister was little, I would read her things like Crindle Cracks. And all of them, actually. We got them all through the years. He also writes plays, and this debut novel, There's a couple more I read as well. Yeah, this is a kind of punk, surrealist, queer fantasy. That's how I describe Philip Ridley. Yep, they were sexy. They were very punkish. And here's a gay novel that nobody ever talks about, and I've loved since it came out. A Sense of Touch. Christopher Osborne, and I read this. I was 21. It came out in 1989. I probably read it when it came out. It's a very middle class, well off. It's a very traditional novel in some ways. He's a pianist and he's gay and he's a concert pianist. Moves in very fancy circles. You go to Italy. It gets sexy, and I remember it getting quite sexy. And I've not seen anything else by this fella. He's a playwright as well. Um, but I've read this several times, and I've never heard anybody mention it. Published by Flamingo, which was like Methuen, one of those imprints that was everywhere at that time, late 80s, early 90s. Now gone forever, absorbed, bitten and chewed away like Pac-Man eating ghosts. That's how publishing works. Um, just these huge conglomerates eating up small, interesting lists, um, and no more was heard. But I remember this. Diane Keaton's memoir, Then Again, which I loved. She's one of my favorite actresses. She comes across as a bit of an idiot. Look at that, I think that's her journals, that she's always kept. She's one of those people who never quite sees why what she's doing is funny, and she sometimes lacks the irony or wherewithal to see what she's doing. And there's a couple of funny stories that she tells against herself without quite seeing why people are annoyed with her. But I love this book. Um, Sometimes you read, as I said before, you read books by people you really like. Miriam Margolyes, you like them on the telly, then you read their book and you think, oh God, maybe they're actually quite awful. Diane Keaton, you think she's really nice, but a bit dippy. This is a first edition of Hallucinating Foucault by Patricia Dunker, one of my great friends, somebody I admire hugely. Um, this is 96, I think, when her first novel comes out. This is sexy and dark and literary. It's about bookishness. Um, yeah, and followed everything Patricia's written, and you should too. I'm going to finish soon because I've taken up too much time already. A few all-time favourites: The Persian Pickle Club by Sandra Dallas. Again from the mid-90s, a book I loved at the time. Quilt makers in the middle of Kansas and gossipy women. She's a great writer, I think. You're in that world completely. Another early 90s novel, Fall of the Flamingo Circus, Kate Rigby. More punks, more queers, they're dropouts, they're squatters. It's written from the point of view of a little kid growing up inside this world on the southeast coast. It's a kind of portrait of the artist as a young punk. I think I've said that before, but that's how I see it. Kate Rigby has, I think, self-published her novels, so they're available, and you must look them up. Caroline Blackwood's book about the Duchess of Windsor, The Last of the Duchess, which is a kind of detective story about what happened to this uh, grand old dame who'd caused such bother for the British monarchy. It's a really, really good um, ride, that book. Very funny as well when it comes to the kind of hideous people surrounding the Duchess of Windsor, protecting this tiny, withered up, almost dead homunculus she becomes. That's dreadful. But they're kind of exploiting her as well. It's a frightening book about fame. Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sukigawa. A really beautiful thing. I've not seen the film, but it's a lovely book about friendships and work and oh, people being neglected. I can't go into it too much without spoiling the story, but yeah, there's a kind of dreadful scandal at the heart of Japanese culture that's exposed through this book. When I think about the old woman who comes along and can make these particular sweets for this sweet shop with such care and delicacy, and oh, it's about people making things properly and not using kind of rubbish ersatz, cheap tat instead of the real thing. Something I really believe in. This last book, 1994, I read this, John Reshi's City of Night. There's nothing on the cover to show you. This is a sexy book about gay hustlers, basically, from the 60s. And look, the postcard inside is these two from My Own Private Idaho, which is the film which Gus Van Sant made in the early 90s, based on this book, as much as it's based on Henry IV Part 2 and Henry V and all those things. It's based on this book about hustlers. The same characters. It's a beat novel though, so it's like a gay on the road, which we need. We need that. On the road is just full of homoeroticism, but they're you know boring straight fellas. This is the real thing. But again, something that's not available, I don't think, in a kind of present day edition. Where's the Penguin Classics John Rashi? I don't know. If they did it, it would be with cheap papers, and maybe it's just as well. Okay, I'm too opinionated. Never mind. That's the end for today. This is probably too long to load. I will talk to you soon. Press like, subscribe, all those things. I hope you like my lights and my tripod. You can't see my tripod, but I'm not wobbling around. And you can hear me. Anyway, see you again soon.